Hello, everyone. I'm Haley Hansen. I'm the leader of Husch Blackwell's higher education group. Before we begin today, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them via the question box. We're going to try to answer questions, but I will say we do have a lot of content today, so if we run out of time, we will try to get back to you and answer them later via email. Also, a PDF of today's presentation is available for you under the program materials icon or folder that you'll see. It looks like a folder. This program, as you saw before, if you joined earlier, has been approved for legal education hours. And for all of those live attendees, you can report your hours by clicking on the CEU icon at the bottom of your screen. And that will generate an actual attendance certificate for you with your course number, and will actually be emailed to you tomorrow along with a recording of today's webinar. And you're welcome to watch, if you missed part of it, watch the webinar again, or if you need to share it with anyone within your campus, that's fine too. Towards the end of the program, we're going to ask you to complete a very short survey. We would love to have your feedback to ensure that our future programs, our monthly webinars, are meeting the topics that you're looking for information on and meeting your needs. So that's all for our housekeeping. Let's go ahead and start with our program, and I want to introduce my co-presenter today, Ellen Armentrout. So we are very lucky to have Ellen here today. Her current practice consists of working with clients on compliance issues. She's really our guru when it comes to the Clery Act. She also works a lot on Title IX issues and the Violence Against Women Act. She advises on public records requests and policy development, as well as all sorts of governance documents. In addition, Ellen helps clients ensure that their institutional policies and practices are consistent with accreditation standards. So thanks for joining me today, Ellen. And I'm going to start with the first part of the webinar, and then we'll switch it over to Ellen, but we can go back and forth as well. So let's talk about what is our agenda for today. So when Ellen and I were talking about our webinars, and some of you may have attended our previous webinars, we usually have them in July because we call it prime Clery time, that you are either have finished, maybe some of you are the go-getters and have already finished your ASR, which is amazing, or you're getting ready to put the final touches on your ASR and get your submissions ready for the Department of Education as well. So we decided that what this webinar could do would be to help you kind of look at what can we learn from the enforcement we've seen. And so the first part of this is really just going to be setting the stage. What are your responsibilities? It's going to go really quick. And then we will talk about kind of how enforcement works with the department. And then the majority of our time is really going to be looking at case studies. And these case studies are actual institutions, but we love all of our institutions, so we didn't want to call out anyone. And so they are publicly available, and if you want to try to find out who they are, I'm sure you can, but they are reported final program review determination reports. And what are the key findings from those, and what are the takeaways? So we'll end with that, and then we'll do some key takeaways and talk about our questions. So let's go ahead and set the stage and really talk about what are the overreaching requirements of Clery. And most of you should know this that have done a lot of work in the Clery space. So you must collect and classify certain Clery crimes. You have to publish your annual security report on or before October 1st of each year. Provide your crime statistics to Ed via the online survey, issue your timely warnings and emergency notifications, and comply, of course, with the Violence Against Women Act, including the Violence Against Women Act policy statements within the annual security report. Some contingency requirements are, if your institution has a police department, then you must create a daily crime log. And we're going to talk a lot about a daily crime log and how important documentation is as we get into some of the meat of the presentation, because that's one of the things we've seen come up repeatedly in some of these audits. We're also, a question to ask if you have additional requirements is, do you have on-campus housing? And if the answer is yes, then you also must complete requirements regarding fire safety as well. And so we can talk about those. Why does compliance matter? Again, everyone wants to have the most secure and safe campus environment possible. Also, it protects your reputation, I think, to make sure that you are in compliance and that you know what the requirements of Clery are and how you're doing at meeting those requirements. And then the stick is essentially the department has now increased, and it will increase each year by typically a couple $1,000s just annually. It's now over $60,000 per violation. So per violation that you were found by the department, you can be fined $60,000. Now, although I say you could be fined, because as we look at some of these case studies and universities, not everyone is fined $60,000 per violation. And in fact, at times it's a little like, reading tea leaves or throwing spaghetti against the wall as to how much the actual fines become and when you get to that process. And typically a school has been working with the department for a long time before you even get to the fine amounts. So, and then the other reason compliance matters is that you could have overarching compliance requirements and possible oversight by the department as well if there are those findings of non-compliance. Okay, so let's move to enforcement basics just to understand the general principles of how our case studies got to where they are. So I think it's important for you to really see this, and this flow chart really helps identify what these Clery reviews look like. And remember, when you look at Clery reviews, a couple things that you need to be cognizant of is that they can start in a variety of different ways. The most common is that you'll have a federal financial aid program review. And within that program review, and these program reviews happen, one of the case processing manuals from the department said they should happen about every 5 to 7 years for an institution. We've had institutions that have never had a program review. We've had institutions who've had program reviews, what they think are continual program reviews, that they just keep getting asked additional questions and updating data. And then we've had institutions that, they haven't had a program review in 10 or 15 years, and maybe they'll get notified of their program review. So that's one of the ways that you can look at Clery, is within that program review. Also, you can do what's called spot checks, that the department will send out questions about specific incidents that have been reported. Most of the time, those are media-related incidents, that there will be some incident that occurred that was in the media that they'll want additional information as to how that was handled. So that can happen. Even a spot check of one particular reporting year is possible. And then another possible way that this can all get started is a complaint that would come in from an individual. That doesn't happen that often that I'm aware of. Ellen, what about you? I mean, we've had maybe one that we've worked on that has come as a result of a complaint. Do you agree with that?
It's interesting. 2 of the ones that we're going to be talking about today came from a combination of media reports and complaints from an organization. So it does happen, but I think probably not so much in a vacuum. You usually get one call. It's a series of events that get news reports, and then a complaint comes in.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not typically one individual who's making a singular complaint, but a series of things that has led to this. So let's look at this typical review. So you receive a notice from the Department of Education that you're going to have a review, and it, again, it can be more of a spot check review or a period of time, or it can be a pretty expansive period of time that's going to be reviewed, typically 5 years. It could be 2 or 3 years, but you'll get a notice, and in that notice has a list of documents that the department wants and the department believes you should have readily available. And it's a fairly exhaustive list, but it's from the clients that we have worked with, it's fairly similar that we have seen from client to client in terms of that notice and the list of documents. And the department then will usually, although in some of them that I have had recently because of COVID or because of other factors, haven't done as many on-campus visits, but we'll ask you to provide information and then follow up with interviews regarding that information. And so again, that has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but more of a hybrid approach. And we've seen interviews that have happened virtually as well when they want to get additional information. Then the department takes back all the information that they've gathered. They take back the documents, maybe the narrative summary that you provided, and they actually analyze what they think the findings are. And that can be usually a pretty lengthy process in which the school really doesn't hear anything. And you're just kind of in a holding pattern. You're not sure exactly what the timing is going to be. And then you'll have a preliminary PRR report that is going to be issued, and you have 60 days to respond to that before the report is updated to create the FPRD, which is the final determination that would be provided. And so it's not until you get to all these steps that really you get the next step, which is the fine amount. And so institutions may see a list of violations or things that are not in compliance, but really have no idea between that preliminary report and the final report exactly what that fine will look like, or if there will even be a fine issued. Although in our experience, if there are non-compliance issues, typically seen at least some fine amount that has been issued. And then the institution has the ability to appeal and to actually request an administrative hearing in front of an ALJ, administrative law judge at the Department of Education. So this process has typically taken prior to COVID 2 to 3 years, maybe a little bit longer now, as we're even looking at what is available. So again, when you get to that final program review determination, that FPRD, that is the first time that you kind of get an inkling of then next what those fine amounts are going to be. Okay, and we've seen by this chart kind of how fine amounts have continued to be on the rise. And now at 2022, we are at $62,689 per violation. So, and as you see the last few years, they keep going up incrementally. Since 2018, they have continued to go up. So we will see another increase in 2023. The most recent enforcement activity, and I think what's going to be important to know is that these are all enforcement activity that's publicly available on the department's website. And Ellen and I were actually preparing for this, and we wondered why the department hasn't put any of their recent enforcement activity past 2020. There's nothing after 2020 on their website, and what would be the rationale for that? And we're not exactly sure, so we will not speculate today, but the information that is publicly available and the actual documentation and determinations are all publicly available through 2020 for institutions that have been fined. So just a couple of glossary abbreviations, and this slide might actually be helpful as you at your campuses are training people on Clery, because at times it feels like you're talking in acronyms. And so, you know, what do these acronyms mean? I'm not going to read them all for you, but as you can see, there are a lot of acronyms that people use as you're looking at Clery and making sure through training methods that everyone has an understanding of what you're talking about when you talk about an ASR, what you're talking about when you're talking about a DCL, the daily crime log. Those types of things are important for individuals to know. So All right, so with that, we've kind of covered our background, and we're going to move right into recent enforcements. So again, they're current through 2020. Here is the website that I was talking about earlier, where you can find all the most recent enforcement actions. And again, we're only addressing information that's publicly available. We are not including any information that is not publicly available, and we don't want to call out any particular institution's name, because I think what you'll see, although there's nuances between University 1 that I'm going to talk about, or the 2 universities that Ellen's going to talk about, there are some themes that you'll find that have happened with a lot of these audits. And so hopefully your takeaways will be, what are the things we can do at our institution to prevent a similar finding at our institution, or what are things that we need to kind of shore up. And I'm going to give you some advice before we get into our case study that I was given as a young litigator, and it was before my first jury trial, so this was a long time ago now, unfortunately, a very long time ago, but about 20 years ago. The senior partner told me that juries never want to hear that you didn't have enough time and that you didn't have enough resources or money to do what you were supposed to do. And I can tell you the Department of Education doesn't want to hear that you didn't have enough time to do Clery and you didn't have enough resources. It may be true, but as you're looking at some of these case studies, keep that in the back of your mind, because I think it really resonates of that doesn't resonate well. The department finds that you should have an institutional response, not a siloed response to Clery. And if you do have an institutional response, then it's not solely on one person's shoulder to try to make sure that you're in compliance with Clery. And so having a multidisciplinary team be responsible for Clery is really where you want to go as you're looking at your Clery response. Of course, you can have someone lead that team, and typically that's somebody within your police department or your campus security, something like that. But you have to have a multidisciplinary team to get this right. You can't do it without having really good conversations and contact with your student affairs group, with Title IX, with academics, with anyone within those areas. You need to really be able to bring in and have part of your Clery team. All right, so let's move on. Let's get on to case study number 1. So University number 1, so as we said, their report was issued in May of 2020. Their review actually began in November of 2015. So on our chart, we said it typically takes 2 to 3 years. Now you're seeing a little bit longer in terms of how long it took from the beginning to the end of this process. The preliminary report was issued in April of 19 to this institution, and then the institution did get it's usually within 60 days, but the department will work with you if you need additional time to respond to that report. But it kind of gives you a little bit of context in terms of the time frame that this institution was working with. There were 8 total findings, including the lack of administrative capability. And that is the finding you don't want to get, honestly. I mean, that basically says, we're going to talk about all of these in detail, but that basically says you don't have the infrastructure put in place at your institution to put Clery, to be in compliance with Clery, that due to all of these issues of siloed reports or not talking to each other, that there's a lack of administrative capability at your institution. So this institution also had violations related to specific crimes, which we see pretty often, and we're going to go into these in detail. Failure to properly classify and disclose crime statistics, daily crime log. Again, I said at the beginning, we see a lot of issues regarding daily crime logs, timely warnings, and policy violations for the issuance of timely warnings. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the documentation that you should have regarding your analysis for timely warnings or emergency notifications. One big one we've seen, and you'll see this in all three case studies, or I think at least 2 out of the 3 case studies, is the omission of policy statements. That has been a big issue that the department has really been focused on. And then failure to produce, because of all these issues, an accurate ASR or AFSR for separate campuses. So, all right, and then the statistical discrepancies that are always kind of a red flag as well. And I think, Ellen, we've seen this is statistical discrepancies can be a way that we've seen some of these audits get started a little bit too, as well, if there's pretty significant discrepancies. You've seen that as well, haven't you?
Yes, and we call that low-hanging fruit. If you've got 2 different reports of your statistics, that's gonna raise a red flag. So,
yeah, and the interesting part is that people think, okay, we messed up. The department's going to come and tell us right away that, or start this audit process. Sometimes it can take a while too. So even when you have statistical discrepancies between the ASR and what had been submitted, it can take a little bit for the department to kind of get to you in terms of other things that the department is working through. So, and a lot of times it's not that the institution is not doing the work. At times there'll be a change in leadership or some sort of personnel change, and information wasn't passed between, there wasn't enough time to pass between the 2 of them. And so again, that can happen and lead to a finding like that as well. All right, so let's talk about this. The first is really, again, the most, I think, the biggest finding that basically says you are not in compliance with Clery. And on University 1, they substantially failed to develop and implement adequate Clery compliance programming. So they were looking at their entire main campus and said that their programming was not adequate. And it found that the university lacked the ability and or willingness, so this is pretty harsh, to properly administer the duties of a participating institution in Title IV federal student aid programs. So this is the one you do not want to get. Again, I think we're going to talk through what are some ways and key takeaways to try to avoid getting a finding like this. What led to this finding at University 1? More than 1,000 crime log entries were not made in the required time frame. And that's something that, they were all logged at this particular institution in big bouts. And so they wouldn't log anything for a period of time and then would log 50 entries. It's, a fairly large campus. So that was a huge red flag. And again, found over 1,000 crime log entries were not made in that appropriate time. Failed to issue timely warnings went into this as well, that the ASRs were not complete and failed to respond to the department's annual survey, did not provide a number of qualified employees for compliance. And so that was, I think, something that I just wanted to point out, because the department doesn't tell you how many people you should have employed in this area. I know a lot of larger institutions have actually hired a Clery compliance officer, which is great if you have the ability to do that. But at smaller institutions, you may not have the budget. And at a lot of the institutions that we've worked with, it is someone else's 3rd or 4th hat that they're wearing. They have a different job, and then they're responsible for putting together the ASR. And so as you look at that, I think making sure that, as you take back information from today's webinar to your administrative team, having a single individual responsible for Clery is always going to be a problem for you. Again, you can always have someone that is leading the way, but really having just a single person is not going to be a good fit for any institution. So really think about how many people you need to have with this responsibility. What does your multidisciplinary team look like? How do you bring people to the table to feel confident in the numbers that you're reporting when you put out your ASR? And I think if you look at it like that, and not just automatically going to, we have to hire a Clery only person, because that's not going to work for a lot of institutions. That's not practical. But you're going to have this lack of administrative capability if you aren't making sure that other individuals within your campus are focused on Clery. And then failed to develop effective communication and coordination for strategy. One of the things we've seen that's been very common throughout not only these public reviews, but also reviews that we've been part of as well, is the need for documentation and the expectation from the department that things are documented. That if reports are made and you don't put out a timely warning, you documented why you didn't do that. You document that there is documentation generated. It doesn't have to be in a particular form, but you've got to communicate and document so that people are all on the same page that this analysis has been done, and we feel good about our response under the Clery Act. This is additional information. If the first part of the letter wasn't harsh enough, then we'll add a little bit more to. That's why we didn't identify University One. But the department really went after University One to say that the process could have moved along much more efficiently without the what they called less productive interactions or delays. That they wanted the school to simply present the facts of a case and its position as clearly as possible and as early as possible within the audit process. So this seemed to be a little bit irritated of the way that the audit actually unfolded and how information was given and responded to, and basically went so far as to write that it's not a criminal investigation and that the institution was so narrow, and that's because of lawyers at times, let's be honest. Answer the question you're asked. If you've ever been in a deposition, you've been told that 100 times, but that the university was so narrow that that the department did not believe that there was sufficient cooperation when looking at the review process. And so, again, we kind of pointed out this piece of text from the final determination report, just to show that you should have your legal team involved, of course. I'm not saying that, but if you can give information about what they're specifically looking for and put that narrative together, I think that is going to be helpful. And if you can do that as quickly as possible, although some of this does take time to put together, and we understand that, but it is important to show some cooperation with the department. The department, though, went on to actually acknowledge, too, that the university had improved in recent years. And Ellen and I really work with our clients on this piece of it, is that it's okay. I mean, if we know we're not in compliance on something, then let's put it out there and show what we have done since then, and not give the excuse of we didn't have enough time or we didn't have enough money, but create a narrative that the department understands we knew what we weren't doing, we've corrected it, and we're moving forward. Because again, these are a 5-year process in this particular university's case. So think about those as well in terms of, and the department has acknowledged that as well. So what are the takeaways that I would give to you, an institution that doesn't have a violation for lack of administrative capability? And that is, again, look at how you're interacting with the department. If you do get into a review process, try to be cooperative. Remember, it's not litigation, but also, I think internally, when you get that notice, hopefully before you get that notice, but that you're looking at areas in which you may have concerns, or that you're not in compliance, or you think we could do a better job in this area, and try to address those as you're moving forward. What I like to say is Clery is continuous improvement. And so if you can kind of go back and say, we didn't just leave this as static for an entire year and then scurry together and put together our annual security report. We were looking at what are ways in which our meetings with the Title IX office and making sure that we're keeping everyone's rights at the forefront, but what are ways in which we can share information that don't violate anyone who has reported rights, but we can make sure that there's not double reporting, or we can make sure that there's good information being given to individuals through rights and options documents, and how do we make sure that we are looking at those things and revamping those things. A continuous improvement model of Clery will help you avoid this lack of administrative capability. So think about that. And also, I should have put it on this slide, but I didn't, is you have to have a multidisciplinary team. You have to have a Clery team. Who is your Clery team? It is not one person or three people within the police department or within the public safety department. You've got to have more than that across campus. And so making sure that that's available and people know they're on that team is important. All right, so violations related to specific incidents, we've seen that pretty consistently, and specifically using terms that on your daily crime log that don't match up with Clery as well, that are Clery crimes. Like we had in this particular instance, there were several events that should have been reported as kidnapping or robbery that were called criminal mischief. And so that's always going to get you into trouble as well in terms of making sure your reports are accurate. The third, failure to properly classify and report crime statistics. Again, one of the most important things here, and I think a misstep that we see all too often is, again, you must disclose crimes for Clery crimes reported on your Clery geography that have been reported to a CSA or local law enforcement. And when you look at that, I think it's important to make sure that you are, again, continuously improving your Clery geography, making sure that you're updating your Clery geography so you understand what do you need to be collecting crime statistics for, crime reports for. And that's been something that institutions, I think, have not done as good of a job documenting as maybe they should. And I've seen some institutions that have a great map that will show and they do a good job when it comes to on-campus property, because that's the easier, some of the easier Clery geography, but maybe not when it comes to whether or not they've done analysis with a separate campus or non-campus property and how that works for their crime statistics as well. So in this failure, the department really identified University One as not reporting crimes and referring to those as underreported crimes, that they had an improper use of unfounded classification. And again, remember, unfounded means that you had a law enforcement individual go through and investigate and determine that there was no basis for the report. So it's a very high, it's not just that there was not charges pressed or that there were not, you didn't move forward. It's a very high bar for an unfounded classification. Record keeping. When Ellen starts talking about University 2 and 3, she's going to talk a lot about record keeping as well when you look at these systematic failures of Clery reportable offenses. Number 4 of University One, again, was these delayed entries that looked at the crime log, and they ranged from everything from drinking to sexual assault of some of these delayed entries, and looked particularly at a couple of years where it looked like they were not meeting the requirements for the daily crime log, and that this had created a serious and persistent pattern of non-compliance. Remember, you're supposed to report within 2 business days. So the daily crime log is going to be a significant document within your review. So look at it as if you're turning it over to the Department of Education in 10 days, and look back and audit it, or that's probably a bad word, but look at it yourself, or have somebody else go over it within your campus and say, okay, what would somebody question about this? Where is there not enough information? Did we timely report? Did we get the report and it's on our crime log within those 2 business days? So those are some of those things are easy fixes that you can actually assess right now. But daily crime logs are a huge document when it comes to the fines, and also whether or not the kind of the administrative capability, because the department, if your daily crime log is right, then they don't trust that you've got all the crimes reported correctly, and then your numbers aren't right on the ASR. It's almost like a domino effect, and it starts with the daily crime log. So think about that as you're working through these issues on your campus. Timely warnings and the issuance of policy violations. So again, for a timely warning, 4 conditions have to be met. And I really like almost like a checklist document that you have. It can be small, it can be half a page. When you know, what is the incident? And then you look at the timely warning. Is it a Clery crime? Check, it's a Clery crime. Was it on Clery geography? Check. On Clery geography. Was it reported to us or local law enforcement? And if it was, then the big question is whether or not there is a continuing threat to students and employees of your campus. And if there is, identify in your documentation what that threat is. That's all you need to do for the documentation on this, and it would help you so much. If you meet all 3, but there isn't a serious continuing threat, document it and just have that written. So let's say that you get a sexual assault report, but you don't believe that there's a serious continuing threat, and you have a meeting or you have individuals coming together, document that. What we see all the time is the department comes back and says, you've listed these crimes and we want to see all of your timely warnings, and there's no documentation regarding some of the crimes that fit the first 3 categories but don't present an ongoing threat. So it can be very simple, but you need to make sure you're documenting. This first example, the department lists several incidents involving sexual assault, which is always an issue that comes up in these audits, and whether or not there was a timely warning that went out regarding sexual assault. So University 1, the department was requiring them to conduct an 8-year file review of all Clery reportable offenses to determine if timely warnings had been issued or not. Timely warnings, again, some of the takeaways, again, I just walked you through what a matrix or a decision tree is. Document, document, document. Have your rationale for why it does or does not meet the standard for a timely warning. That will help you so much when you come to an audit. Okay, I got to move quicker because I'm taking too much time. I'm sorry, Ellen, I'm going to go fast. Okay, that the omitted or inadequate policy statements, again, these were the policy statements that were missing. VAWA policy statements are the most common that we see that are missing because usually the policy is simply attached, and that in and of itself doesn't meet the requirements under Clery. You may attach your policy after you've individually already answered all the questions required to be answered in your ASR. That's okay, but just attaching the policy is never going to meet what's required for VAWA. And then the annual security reports takeaways, really looking at whether or not you have documentation to really back up your statistics, how you document that information, and how do you essentially, again, what the department was asking this institution to do would be to do an audit. All right, so one of the big things we see is that they're not identifying separate campuses or multiple campuses, and making sure that at least you have a rationale of why a property would meet the definition of a separate campus or would be non-campus property. So when we saw this in this particular situation, the department determined that the university hadn't been issuing ASRs for its separate campuses, and so was very concerned about the fact that there hadn't been additional ASRs, and that you have to have each individual piece of policy information and crime statistics for each of those separate campuses. So the department had serious concerns that they had determined additional campuses and none of those requirements were met under the ASR. All right, so here's our first poll question for you today. So the case scenario is the university's Alumni Association purchased a residential complex from private owners where 1,500 university students reside. The management company that runs the complex is now partnering with the university with their residential life program. They have residential life coordinators that are part of this residential life program, live in the housing as well. Is this complex part of the university's Clery geography? So that's your question. And you get to say the answers are yes, it's part of the on-campus student housing. Yes, but it's non-campus housing, non-campus property. Yes, it's public property, or no, it's privately owned. And so therefore it is not going to be part of the Clery geography. So let's see what, see. Somehow it didn't take it. Well, sorry about that. I thought I launched it, but maybe I didn't. Okay, there we go. I just needed to refresh it. So, all right. So thank you very much for participating in our first poll question. I'll read it, the answer directly from the department. That the facts that we gave you, along with those statements that they collected with University One, indicated that the university exercised a significant amount of control over the operation of that complex, and therefore the buildings and operations in support of the university's institutional purposes, and so it should have been included in the campus geography. So you guys were correct. And within this particular property, which we didn't say how close it was within the first category of on-campus property. So finally, the last finding from from University One was the failure to report crime statistics accurately. The takeaways for you for that are, again, making sure that your ASR and your statistics match and that you fix any discrepancies that you may have, and having those resources put in place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Haley. So I'm going to talk a little bit about University number 2, which is another 2020 finding. In this situation, the review began in 2017, wrapped up the final program review determination in 2020. So that's a little bit, not quite as long as the previous, but still 3 years, which is a very long time if you're going through it. You'll notice that the findings are very similar. In this instance, there are only 5 findings. And so you'll see we've got lack of administrative capability, which we've seen before, failure to report crime statistics accurately to the department and in the report. So again, this is what we've talked about, this low-hanging fruit, failure to issue timely warnings. I think you all are starting to see some themes here that come up repeatedly. Failure to identify and notify campus security authorities to ensure accurate crime reporting and timely warnings. This is something that I'm going to focus a little bit more on. And as I talk about this, I'm going to focus less on the findings that we've talked about in detail before, because they're so similar, but where there are nuances, I will try to pull them out. And then failure to maintain an accurate and complete daily crime log. That is something we're going to see with all 3 of the universities that we're talking about today. So we're going to start with another poll question. Every year, Paul, a university employee, receives an email letter informing him of his role as a CSA and requesting that he report any crimes or other relevant information reported to him in the previous year. Is this sufficient communication between the institution and the CSA? So here we've got some poll questions. Yes, the CSA is informed of the CSA's role and provided an opportunity to submit crimes and other relevant information. B, no, CSAs need formal training and a letter would not suffice. C, no, while formal training is not required, an annual letter is not sufficient. So I'm going to give you all a chance to respond here. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Haley, I might need to get you to tell me your, oh, there we go. We've got answers. So most people say, well, most people seem to say no, CSAs need formal training and a letter would not suffice. I'll tell you, this was a little bit of a cheat because I would have accepted B and C. There was a time that I would have said C was the only correct answer, but because what I'm seeing in these letters so much is while there is not a formal training requirement, it seems that the department really anticipates that effective training is necessary if you're going to have an effective Clery compliance program. So for the lack of administrative capability finding, the department found that the university failed to develop and implement an adequate system of internal controls. This is, I think, very much in line with what Haley has been saying about having a group, some sort of committee that's looking at this, because if you don't have checks and balances between and among your university departments, you're not going to be able to comply effectively. This is an interesting situation. The school provided CSA training, but 50 CSAs did not attend. And that, because they provided training and that people were not, that was not attended fully, the department found that that was a serious shortcoming. So this is another scenario for you all. The department during a Clery audit determined that the public university had made, and I should tell you, some of these scenarios are not linked to the particular universities that we're talking about, just so you know. We've pulled some scenarios that are related. So the department during a Clery audit determined that the public university had made several errors in reporting its crime statistics, both in the ASR and to the department. Due to errors in reporting crime statistics, the department required the university to A, make a note in future ASRs that the previous year's statistics were incorrect, B, audit the statistics reported in the ASR and correct them in the following ASR, or C, audit all of the reports received in the years covered by the ASR and make corrections prior in the following ASR. So correcting your previous documentation. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to vote. And I'm gonna, yes, that is something, the correct answer is C. You have to, they made this university go back not just to their reported statistics in the ASR, but to all of the underlying documents to find where there were any errors in reporting. I draw that out because that's a significant burden on a university, even ones who have very well kept documentation. So this is more incentive to have things in shape on the front end so that you're not asked to do this on the back end. So the takeaways, statistical errors tend to result in the most significant fines because each error is fineable. So if you have 10 wrong statistics, you're looking at 10 out of compliance statistics, and that can rack up fines. That's not to say you'll get a $62,000 fine for every one of them, but it's something to keep in mind. And discrepancies between what you've reported to the department and the statistics in the ASR, that's what we were saying before. That conflict is going to raise concerns for the department because something by definition is not right. This school, interestingly, had a policy for issuing timely warnings, but it didn't follow them. And the department, I mean, it's all well and good to have a policy, but if you're not following it, you might as well not even have it in terms of your compliance. So this was an area where there were policies, but they weren't followed. So we recommend having a policy, and we recommend following it so that you're not, you don't get found to be in violation. Finding number 4, failure to identify and notify campus security authorities to ensure accurate crime reporting and timely warnings. That was something that we've talked about. We talked about in the lack of administrative capability finding, which often happens. You know, that's sort of the umbrella for the other findings that the department comes up with. They didn't have any the university didn't have CSA materials prior to 2015. The CSA reporting form that was created was insufficient for a time. And the insufficiency was that the form did not contemplate that someone would want to be identified as reporting the crime. And the department said there has to be that option that I could say, I'm Ellen Armentrout and I want to report this crime. Every CSA form assumed anonymity. Now, it's fine if someone requests anonymity, but the form itself that you're using as your CSA reporting form cannot assume anonymity, at least in this situation with the department. And then finally, camp directors were not identified as CSAs. Now, with the rescission of the Clery handbook and the FSA appendix, maybe there, and the addition of the Clery appendix, maybe there's some more discretion here. But in this situation, the school had undercalculated its CSAs, which was a problem. So some takeaways: CSA identification and training and communication are extremely important. Institutions need to look at all facets of their programming to determine who might be a CSA. Even with the new appendix, you need to know who your CSAs are. Someone has asked, what are some ways to ensure 100% CSA training compliance? I mean, my recommendation is put someone in charge of training and have that person be a total bulldog in terms of following up with individuals to make sure that they get trained. Daily crime log, again, they were hit with their daily crime log. And in this instance, they were dinged because it wasn't clear what they were saying. They would characterize an incident as information or assist other agency when it should have been characterized as, for example, sexual assault. So having a daily crime log, which you're required to do if you have a police department or a security department on campus, not if you don't, but if you do, not only do you have to have it, but you have to be really clear in your characterizations of the crimes that are occurring on campus. And note, these are not just Clery crimes, these are all crimes occurring in your Clery geography and on your patrol jurisdiction. So those were sort of the highlights from University 2. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about University 3. This one lasted from 2014 to 2019 with a correction that was issued in 2020 and a correction issued by the department. This one, I think it's important to note, when it started, the focus was on 2009 to 2012. During the course of the audit itself, the focus expanded an additional 4 years to include 2013 through 2016. I raised that not as sort of a scare tactic, but a reminder that these things, they can start out as one thing and they can grow into another. Because, Haley mentioned spot checks. It's not unlikely, maybe I don't want to say it is likely, but you can have a spot check that grows enormously into a full-blown audit. So just keep that in mind. The department is not wedded to whatever its initial correspondence with you says. So this university had the same findings with regard to lack of administrative capability, failure to issue emergency notifications, failure to comply with their own sexual violence policy, again, daily crime log, again, timely warnings, interestingly, failure to disclose accurate and complete hate crime statistics, failure to compile and disclose accurate and complete crime statistics, again, one that we've seen, again, discrepancies between the ASR and what was reported to the department, failure to produce and distribute the ASR in accordance with federal regulations, omitted information disclosures, which we've talked about, failure to distribute the annual fire safety report in accordance with federal regulations. And I raised that, and I just want to get it in here because I want to be sure we don't not cover it. We have seen institutions like this one get hit for failure to appropriately distribute their ASR and failure to distribute their AFSR separately. They've been hit separately, even though they've always published them as one document. So that's 2 violations, even though you're thinking to yourself, I didn't get the one document out. So keep that in mind. So this settled. So I say that because part of the settlement agreement involved post-monitoring review, which can happen. So we're talking very specifically about these enforcement findings and fines, and those things are really hard. But one thing that is also hard is continual monitoring. So that is something that can happen as a result of these reviews as well. So with the lack of administrative capability, I want to stress again, clearly the department thinks CSA training is important because the failure to train tends to result in other shortcomings that are compliance issues down the line. So the CSA training, while not explicitly required, is a nut that we want to be sure we're covering. The university didn't issue an emergency notification in a particular incident and did in two different incidents, one involving sexual assault, one involving a controversial guest speaker. I raised this because the university pushed back on the department and said, look, we didn't issue an emergency notification because we didn't think there was we didn't have enough information at the time to determine there was a serious and continuing threat. The department looked at their response to the program review report and said, oh, we agree with you. So my takeaway there is, we said earlier, you don't want to be litigious and difficult, but if you've got documentation showing why you did what you did, share it with the department. This is a back and forth, and you can make your case for why you did what you did. With regard to the speaker on campus, this was a little trickier. This one struck me because they issued an emergency notification, but it wasn't fast enough. And so that's something that I think is sometimes easier in retrospect than in the moment to determine, but it is something to keep in mind when you're working on these, issuing these campus alerts. Haley, do you think we should skip this, or do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think we're low on time. Let's make up a little time.
We're going to skip the scenario. I apologize, y'all. Finding number 3, failure to comply with the university's sexual violence policy. This was a situation where the university did not say appropriately in its policy and did not actually inform complainants about the outcome of a sexual assault violation. That is something that is very important, and the university will, the department will seize on that if you don't do that. So be sure if you, to have the appropriate policy language and follow your policies with regard to informing both claimants and respondents about the outcomes of cases. Again, there was a daily crime log violation. It must be clear and complete. The university tried to say, but the shortcomings in our daily crime log didn't affect our ASR statistic. The department said, doesn't matter. That's still a violation if your daily crime log is not clear and complete. Timely warnings. The thing I wanted to stress about this finding is, in this instance, the school defined timely as within 2 days, and the department said, you cannot have a definition. It has to be fact-based on the circumstances of your situation. So this was not okay from the department's perspective. We would not recommend defining timely with a certain time limit. Also, the school consolidated incidents into a timely warning after a certain period of time, and the department said that was not acceptable. Again, we recommend a matrix or a rubric, as does the department. Hate crime statistics in this situation, hate crimes can be shared in a narrative format. That's fine, but if you do that, you cannot just say hate crime. You have to say what the hate crime was, and that was something that the school did not do. So, for example, you need to say the hate crime was harassment motivated by race discrimination or intimidation. You cannot simply say race discrimination. Also, the department said specifically here, it's imperative that institutions check the accuracy of their data. Again, this goes back to what Haley was saying. We really recommend multiple people so you can have checks and balances, because sometimes some people are so immersed that they can't read the ASR as if it were being read by an outsider. And so you need additional eyes for that reason. Again, this was the situation where the crime statistics that resulted in the growth of the time period that Ed was looking at. So a review that starts small can grow, and we recommend cooperating with the department to find sort of a happy medium of what you need to share and how far back that you need to go. Again, we've talked about the discrepancies in reporting. That's always going to get you into trouble. And as I mentioned, the failure to provide the document by the date as a single document by October 1st, They got dinged for that for the ASR and the AFSR as well. So that is something you need to be really mindful of. Sometimes it might feel like the the AFSR is kind of a tag along to the ASR, but the department thinks of it as a separate document, and those requirements need to be met as well, or you will get dinged separately for those. I think I've covered that. Haley, back to you for the key takeaways.
Sure. Thanks, Ellen. And I think one of the key takeaways just in looking at these three universities is how similar a lot of their findings are. And so if you're really looking at, okay, this is too much, where do we start? I mean, take a look at these slides and start at where you think you can make the most progress. So whether that's your daily crime log, all of them had issues with that, or if it's training for CSAs. Again, it's so frustrating that the department will not say it's required when clearly when you're looking at their audits and these findings, they seem to think you can't be in compliance if you don't have some sort of training. So, really think about that in terms of how you want to make progress at your institution. So these takeaways are pretty self-explanatory, and we've actually covered most of them. But just understand that the scope of your review can really change, and that they're a tremendous amount of work, and they go on for years. The reviews do. It is a burden for the institution. So the better off your initial response is to try to give the department as much information as they need to be able to be satisfied that you're meeting Clery, the better. So the worst case scenario is the spot check that turns into a full-blown audit. The best case scenario is the spot check that you have to contact the department because you haven't heard anything from them, and you contact multiple times to find out that they're fine with what you submitted. So that's the two ends of the spectrum, and we're really hoping that we can, that with vigilance and that multidisciplinary team, you can be on the side of giving them the information they need so you don't have to look and dig further. Documentation matters. Make sure you keep your documentation and that you have it in a place where it's accessible. I've seen way too many times in which it is on the computer of the person in the police department or the public safety that's in charge of Clery. And then when that person is not there, it's not accessible, or they don't know where it's kept, or it's not in any area. Of course, we have to be mindful to keep things secure, but we've got to have other people that know where this information is as well, because they ask you to go back at times if you're in a full-blown audit, many years of compliance. And then don't be afraid to push back if the department is wrong on something, but prepare your administration that it's likely they will find something. It is cooperative. I agree that the department wants to cooperate, but they're not looking for, okay, you tried. They want compliance. And if you tried to be in compliance, but you didn't know about something or you got something wrong, you're still probably going to end up maybe a much lesser fine, but at least something. So make sure your president knows that this is going on and that this is likely going to be a fine years down the road, and that it could have some sort of PR that would come back. So again, make sure that you do everything you can to keep your institution off the department's radar. And also, when I talk about a multidisciplinary team, make sure your financial aid department knows if they're getting a program review or if they become aware of it, it will likely have Clery documents being requested. Don't just have financial aid in a vacuum, gathering that information and turning it in on your behalf. And then again, you haven't put your best foot forward to start off with or been able to be as clear as you want to be in terms of your compliance. So those would be our takeaways. We are 3 minutes over, so I think there have been questions that have been submitted. We will try to get back to you on those questions. If you want any information, Husch Blackwell Innovations actually has created a Clery compliance tool set. Anastasia Caffrey is in charge of demoing that tool set. Here's a QR code if you're interested in getting more information to help with compliance. If you have no interest, that's totally fine too. And we really thank you for attending our webinar today. Ellen, thank you so much for doing a great job on the webinar. And with that, I will read our closing information, which is we hope that you enjoyed this information that was useful. As a reminder, this program has been approved for continuing legal education hours, so make sure you report it on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. The certificate of attendance will be coming tomorrow, along with a recording that will be available for 2 weeks. And we would love it if you'd complete this short survey to give us any feedback. And if your feedback is to end on time, then that is totally my fault. So I'm sorry that we're ending 4 minutes, but we will take that feedback too, because we should. So just a lot of information to cover, and we certainly appreciate your participation today. So with that, we will tell you goodbye, and again, appreciate you joining on this webinar today.